Kerry Turner, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Grant. It's great to be here.
Kerry, first off, can you tell us about being a part of your family, which obviously are esteemed in water polo? Your father, Bill, was the president of Water Polo Australia. Your mother, Pat, was the team manager of the Australian team and was a driving force to getting women's water polo in the Sydney 2000 Olympics. Tell us about what it was like growing up in the Jones family.
Well, I'm the youngest of six, and I think I needed a name tag at times because, she had six kids, Mum, and Dad was so actively involved in water polo. And there's 4 girls, 2 boys, and all the girls played water polo, and 3 of us actually ended up representing Australia. So it was a bit of a water polo family, which happens across this sport. So here's to all the water polo families in water polo, because I know it can get pretty hectic. But I just think it's so great to be able to share, in particular, my mum's story today. She's an amazing woman that was so important in getting women's water polo into the Olympics with a lot of other people around her. But as her daughter and watching what she did, it's just an honour to be able to tell her story today.
Tell me a little bit very quickly about your own career. You mentioned you represented Australia. Tell us about some of the pinnacles for yourself representing your country.
Well, you can see this photo of me. I'm in a picture there with Sam the Eagle with Lisa Copeland, and I was only 17 at the time, and it was my first year in the Australian team. So excited because as a young girl, I just dreamed of being in the Olympics, and because that was the time I could see women playing sport on the telly, and I didn't care what sport it was. I just wanted to be there. I just resonated with these women. So to get picked in the Australian team when I was doing my HSC and to go to the LA Games the week before, because we weren't in the Olympics, that picture shows that's the closest I ever came to the Olympic rings. Because although I played for a decade and went to 5 World Cups, 2 World Championships, and had a great time, that dream wasn't there for me. I just love playing, and some of the biggest moments were performed in front of, a couple of people. I used to say a frog in a cricket, like in this. But the girls that I played with and that team were just a really wonderful, delicious part of my 20s. And the game's just so much fun, and to play at that level was absolutely awesome, and to share a lot of those moments with my sister in particular, Lisa, was really lovely. So I think that the saddest thing, this emptiness for me, was I didn't get to achieve a dream which a lot of the players at my time were really gunning for. And I think that's inspired me in my job now, because I head up the states, the New South Wales Women in Sports Strategy. It sits here in my heart because you should never feel unworthy. You know what I mean? Like, you're there at that stage, you should have had that opportunity. And I think all of us felt so excited the moment women's water polo was included, and all of us were so excited when they won that medal. And all of us collectively were just glad that women's water polo was validated. But there is an emptiness, and that emptiness was, it wasn't our time. That time should have been there too.
And as you say, it must have been really difficult in your water polo playing career to be at the peak of your career and never get the opportunity like many of your colleagues in the other aquatic disciplines and other sports, high profile amateur sports, were getting that opportunity to represent their nation at the Olympic Games.
Yeah, it just felt like it was always a fight, I know in the early, my mum was basically a woman of firsts in the really early days. A lovely lady called Elsa Thompson from Victoria. Mum and Elsa got the first interstate challenge together. It was 1969. So before then, there wasn't even a nationals. And then, the first nationals, Mum took the first Australian team away. A lot of firsts in those 70s. In the 80s and 90s, we were a really good performing team. We were winning, a couple of golds here and a silver there. And every time an Olympics came and went, it was like, dang, there's another chance that didn't happen. There was a lot of really good people advocating. Leanne Barnes was like Mum's partner in crime. She was at the FINA level in that capacity, and Mum was doing a lot of work in Australia, and they were both managing Australian teams. Ian Trent was having a lot of success as a coach, and the late Dave Woods was the same. So I think the really early days of fundraising for the right to go away shifted to oh, this team's pretty good, let's invest in them, to we're still not in the Olympics yet. And I think for my mum, and just observing her, in 1991, we set up the first the Gender Equity Commission for Women's Water Polo. Mum was the chair, Leanne Barnes was on it, I was on it too, and there was quite a few other women. And that was our first, you know, direct statement of what we wanted to do. And number one on that agenda was to get women's water polo into the Olympics. And every time there was a World Cup or a World Championships, there was a lot of robust discussion and a lot of head nodding and a lot of, yeah, no traction, real traction. And I think in '93, when we were granted the Olympics, that's when I saw a fundamental shift in my mum. She went from doing all the right things to becoming, I think, the starting of rebellious Pat. You know, it was basically the time for significant change. And for me personally, my career ended in '94. I couldn't go any longer. It's such a hard sport, isn't it? And there's so many in my area. And like, I think of Debbie Watson, I think she played for 17 years. My hat goes off to my body, just didn't work anymore. But a lot of us in that era, it just wasn't our time. But I think another significant shift for us in the lead up to the Olympics was getting the 1995 World Cup in Sydney. And that's where Ross Coggan, when he was the executive director of New South Wales Water Polo, there's a real showman. You know, he knew how to put on a good show. My father, mum and I were on the organising committee with Ross, and we just thought, here's our chance to show the world, to show FINA, that if you have a competition in Australia for women's water polo, we will fill the stands and we'll make it grand. And for those that were around in '95, we filled the stands. Ross even had his nephew play on, you know, at the Olympic pool, they've got the diving boards. So there was a band on the top diving board and there was a song, and our girls won, and it was yay, and the FINA officials went, yay, look at this. And I think at that point, it was the most frustrating, because once again, they all went back and then nothing happened about Olympic inclusion. And that's when Mum went full-born rebel. She saw this article in the Sydney Morning Herald about a lawyer that got bullied. And she went, I've been bullied. She just got onto the paper and went, I'm going to tell you the story about women's water. She'd had enough. And Dad had just stepped down as president too. And I think Mum and Dad represent an era where it was really, you know, it's always been highly respectful. And she could see this time now to up the ante. You know, once again, with the support of people like Leanne Barnes, and Leanne was doing her agitation. But I think that was a classic moment by actually, you know, going full pelt and just saying her story. By the next day, all the media outlets were wanting Mum's story about women's water polo and why it wasn't in. There should not be any reason. And then she was just catapulted into this media sort of scrum. And SBS in particular loved Mum's story. And so Mum became this radical disruptor, I think, this full-born rebel. And her job really going forward was to keep the pressure on. And you'll see a lot of pictures there. The first one was, she would be getting from all these media outlets heads up of when an Olympic official was coming out. And you see that picture there of our first massive demonstration at the airport. Now those placards, Dad wrote the writing with his beautiful handwriting, you know, so that was kind of cute. Every player that could get rustled up, I think Phil Bowers really helped out then, and you know, Bruce Folsom. We just got whatever player was available. It's not a good look to have a water polo hat on and a cossie and shoes and a placard. You know, it's like, do we have to demonstrate today? Yes, come on. But there we were, and all the media just went nuts with it. Now, behind the scenes, there was a lot of other pressure happening with politicians and whatnot. But I think Mum's job now was to be the public face of this rebellion. And then you see that next picture of Liz Weeks taking the letter into a press conference. That was really courageous of Liz, because any player at the time, it's hard to be a disruptor. It really is. You don't know if it's going to affect you. And I think at that moment, that particular press conference was the last straw for a lot of the organising committee. And to wrap this story up, I think straight after that, virtually women's water polo was included. as I said, there's a lot of people around this story. This is what Mum did. And I'm pretty sure that it was a significant game changer. And this pressure that was applied publicly, because the answer was there is no answer. There is no answer to why women's water polo should not be included. The negotiations at this stage were coming down. There's no room in the village. So at all levels, there was still that fight to get inclusion. And then, of course, once that green light happened, I mean, that last picture there, we all know what happened. That team pulled off. I'm getting goosey talking about this.
Fantastic. I love the
Yeah.
passion. I think one of the things you bring up there is the pressure that was applied as your mother, as the spokesperson for the campaign. And I believe that there were very senior politicians that to this day, your mother, Pat, believes that they influenced Semaranch directly, went over the head of FINA and influenced Semaranch directly to get women's water polo in.
Yeah. I think in any story like this, there's a bit of pressure happening here. There's pressure happening over there. I think Mum's job was don't ask questions, do this. She did that. And and when you're applying pressure and you're hosting a country, and you know there was a lot of talk about taking this to the anti-discrimination courts. You know, I think the definite push and pull was around. There was absolutely no reason. It was inequitable. It was an injustice, you know. And I think what's lovely now is at the IOC and the Commonwealth Games level, they actually do not include a sport now without, you know, dual representation. And you saw that with rugby sevens. They got in the IRB push, but the women's rugby sevens had to get in at the same time. So, you know, we're in a much better position now internationally with that equality piece. And there's definitely moves afoot to get more females as coaches. These are really good things. But when you don't have that on the cards, you have to disrupt business. And me working in this trade now as a strategist for government, I hear the stories of all sports. I hear the stories of the Matildas, you know, of the AFL girls, of our cricketers. It's the same story. And I think what's beautiful is once the stage is set, you know, the value's unleashed and they can play. And at every step of the way, I think our Australian female athletes have just been awesome at all levels. Yeah.
And I think probably some of the key points out of that amazing story is that it was a discrimination claim that was in the Sydney Morning Herald that was against a lawyer that was being bullied by her colleagues that just kicked your mum into another gear, and also the absolute respect still for the organisation by waiting until your father Bill had finished up his tenure as the president of Water Polo Australia. Yeah.
Oh, look, and this is a beautiful thing that I see in my parents. I mean, like I have a photo there, you can show it now, of Mum and Dad. I mean, they're the penultimate lovebirds. They're still as very, you know, it's a beautiful story, and their passion for water polo and the respect for each other has been so solid. And I think, you know, Dad was incredibly proud, as we all were, of you know, what Mum was able to do. And I was relieved for her because at the time when she was doing all this, she was running a childcare centre. They were gearing up to retire. Her daughters weren't playing anymore. This was purely about the injustice. And, you know, go Pat, because she had this energy at this stage, and she's in her late 60s doing all this to keep fighting the good fight. And what was lovely, I think, that water polo did during the Olympics is that all the ex-players were invited back. And I think that first game at Ryde Pool, I was sitting next to my sister Lisa. We'd had our first couple of kids. You know, over there was some of the other players. You know, we all knew each other. We got into the pool. As soon as the girls walked out to that Olympic music, we bawled our eyes out because it was validation. You know, we'd made it. There's the stage. And I think all the girls, it was too much of a big moment for them too. They didn't actually play good in that first game because it was just, whoa. But it was that moment of relief. We're here, you know, we're justified and we feel like we're worthy. And so I use that word all the time, you know, sport should never make you not feel worthy. And at that moment we were worthy. We've felt it. And everyone collectively, it was like all their predecessors were with them. And on the final, it was really lovely because we all got tickets. We were randomly across that 17,500 crowd. And funnily enough, I randomly got to sit next to the SDS reporter that was really helping Mum. We held hands during the whole game. We're in tears. Like, it's just, everyone has a story about that game. My pride for that team is bursting because they pulled off an amazing feat, you know, with all that pressure. But isn't it a fitting finale to all those years of fighting for a cause? And that's changed the course, not only for water polo in this country, but globally. We
And
now have Olympians that are women, and that's a fantastic thing. Yeah.
tell us about the fairy tale ending. Obviously, yeah, it's a fairy tale journey from the worthiness getting it included games of that first game and the sheer emotion of being included to the fairy tale ending when Yvette Higgins scores the winning goal.
Yeah, look, it was an arm wrestle match. It was low scoring, and it was pretty, you know, yeah, it was a big tussle. It's like, you know, how we saw the documentary just the other night about Kathy Freeman when she walks out onto and you can't. It was deafening. It was deafening, and I'm just actually getting very goose-dotty again because it was just like, it was almost you're pinching yourself. You were so glad it happened, and I just think. Yeah, it was overwhelming. I know. Bridget Gustafson threw the flowers up to Mum. She caught them, and I think she still got them, which is really lovely. I think it's still a bit of a blur for me because I was hugging that reporter. Everyone was nuts. It was just really fabulous. I think for me, as a player that played with most of the girls in that thing, I was just really emotional seeing them and seeing that stage and you know, totally feeling excited for them. We all went back to the Ryde pub, of course, the place of pace, and they were like rock stars when they arrived in. It was just really exciting, and the vibe that night was, yeah, you know, very memorable. It was a moment in time. It was the game changer for our sport, and that team deserve every credit for pulling that amazing game out of their hat. And yeah, the champ, Yvette, what a time to let go of a left-hander, eh?
And Kerry, moving forward to today, you've mentioned that you have a key role in government, in New South Wales government, heading up women's in sport strategy. How important is it to you, and how great is it for you to be able to work on your passion of continuing to develop the equality and also the performance and recognition of women in sport?
Yeah, well, I'm at the peak of my career right now. This is a combination. This is the most wonderful thing I've ever worked on. I'm proud that I got it on the agenda. It took a bit to get it on the government agenda. The reason I did is I could see that this moment in time was the time to get the government ducks lined up so that we could add value to what's happening. The rising profile of female sport in the last 3 years has been significant. Women playing professional sport, we've never seen this before. It's fantastic. It's shifting conversations that are happening with young girls, with their families. There are now careers that you can have. There's equal prize money happening in different sports. The last event I went to was the ICC T20 Cricket World Cup. I was in the stands. Actually, when I walked out with my whole team, you know, we all flew down there because we wanted to be part of history. I just felt when I walked into the MCG and I saw that crowd, I had the same feeling as Ryde Pool. You know, I had that same feeling again. And I just got so emotional because I'm just so excited. Women's sport looks and sounds different. It feels different. It has a different consumption, and it's fabulous. And by that, I just want to make sure that whatever I'm doing moving forward with this government strategy, that I can leverage as much investment, I can attract major events, and we can actually grow the game for women and girls and just make it really special. We want more women coaching. We want more leaders. But at the end of the day, I just want girls to feel confident enough to do whatever they want to do. We've got this great program called Daughters and Dads, and it's about a great role that dads can play in their daughter's life to support them, you know, in their social and emotional well-being, but also about sporting skills. And I'm really proud that I'm scaling that up. So I'm just full of a lot of excitement. I know at the heart of this, it's because I'm my mum's daughter. I hold that really closely, and I'm so proud of her. Oh. But I also think there's a line in Ride Like a Girl. Have you seen that movie? And the dad says to her, you know, when you see a gap in the race, that's God saying to you, you've got to take it, because it'll close as quickly as you can say your mother's name. And I think this is a moment in time that, you know, I've got this strategy for the next 3 years. I've got massive investment. Over 93 million has been invested over this first year. It's been a fabulous. We're building things for women now, and, you know, it's really good. I've got 3 more years of this. We've had COVID, so that's a bit of a party pooper. But I definitely am excited to see this out and see a significant shift. And I know that maybe the thing that was empty in me has been the thing that spurred me on to make, you know, a significant difference. So yeah, let's go women in sport, hey?
Well, Kerry, as a father of 2 daughters, I don't think there could be anyone better leading the charge for women in sport in New South Wales government. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey and your family and your mother's journey as well.
Yeah, and to everyone in water polo, just enjoy this next 2 weeks. It was a fabulous time, and a big shout out to those girls and everyone involved in that wonderful games that we had. And thanks for having me on the show.